Some people get a real kick out of that sort of thing, screaming up and down a bit of twisted metal. It's not my cup of tea. It's not really the recipe for a balanced life. This presentation is all about that choice. As elected representatives, you have been entrusted with some very substantial community assets. You can manage them with all the volatility of a roller coaster with a 45-second lifespan, or you can take a calm, measured, long-term approach. Let's see. In recent times, we've become much better at managing our assets. Even recognizing them has been a great start. We've become aware that we have to manage substantial assets, like native trees, so that future generations can use them. But not all assets are as attractive as this tree. Some can't be seen, and some are barely acknowledged, and yet they're worth hundreds of millions of dollars and are absolutely essential to your community. A sobering thought for any politician is that most of these assets were here long before you were elected, and hopefully, if you've been any good, most of them will be here long after your political career has ended. The idea of stewardship, being a protector and guardian of the assets your community owns, is a very fundamental one. And to do it properly, you have to understand the basic principles of prudent asset management. In 1983, the government passed the Local Government Amendment Act No. 3, which requires authorities to exercise sound financial management and maintain its assets in a sustainable way. In particular, full funding of depreciation and changes in the way we value assets was required from July the 1st, 1999. The Auditor General has stated that asset management plans will be the means of compliance with the Act. As elected representatives, you want to make sound decisions based on reliable information. So we spoke to some of the people who have been responsible for putting together these asset management plans.
The asset plan tells you about the risk you take. And the job of an asset plan and the job of someone like me is to put that information in front of the decision makers and say, it's your decision. It's your decision on behalf of the community how much risk you take. Now the point is, if you don't build the reservoir, my job and the asset plan's job is to tell you the effect of that decision.
It allows you to make choices, it allows you to make predictions and plan. It allows you to consider the impact of decisions, whereas perhaps in former times we were concerned about upfront costs, about what it will cost us to actually build and put in the ground. We're now concerned about what it will cost over its life.
A lot of people say we're paying rates, what do we get for it? And the problem is half their rates get buried. And in terms of a swimming pool, this of course is a real example where the swimming pool that you see on the surface is very glamorous and colourful and everyone thinks it's wonderful, but the real asset of it is either underground or locked away in concrete bunkers next door here, and nobody ever sees that. And that is the major factor when it comes to running this pool.
I guess when we all become part of a community board or a council, we have these sort of, we get in on an election promise about what we're going to do and cut rates or build this. But when you have an asset management plan, they sit down as a new member and they read it and they see how thoroughly the community have planned their future, and that gives them something to build on. So it leads to not having irrational decision making, and it also leads to, in our case, that the community own those decisions, and it's not made by us, Big Brother, it's made by the communities.
Modern asset management techniques and concepts probably only came about 6 years ago and is developing quite quickly. Of course we want it to be quicker, but in the context of 100 years of those assets being in the ground, it's actually come a long way in a short time.
Previously, the people in the field actually just went out and just did the work. And if something broke, instruction came, they just went and fixed it. Now they're working to a specification, a schedule. They know what
standards required when they do the repairs. There is a reporting back on that information, and that gets fed back into the systems in the office. So there's a lot more control over what is actually happening in the field than what was traditionally in the past.
Well, the first point is, do you know the value of your assets? How do you value them? You can't just pop into the second-hand store and say, what will you give me from a water reticulation system? But people value things every day, and there are ways of determining the value of your community's assets.
Obviously, we don't have market values for a lot of these assets. So the normal thing like property valuations, when you do have a competitive market, goes out the window. But what you can do is look at the replacement costs for those assets, and then from that work out how much those overall assets have deteriorated over the years to get a sort of a written down value of the replacement value.
Obviously the most common way is the replacement value. How much would it cost you to go and rebuild this pavement today using today's technology and materials? And then having established that, we need to look at, well, what's the age of the road, and therefore how much life has it got left, and then we talk about the depreciated replacement cost of the asset.
Okay, so we can put a value on all these assets, but that raises an even more fundamental question. Why do we have some of these assets? What seemed like a great idea to a previous generation might not much be valued by a present generation of ratepayers.
It actually forces you to actually do a stock take, spring clean if you like, and say, do we actually want this or not? It does actually require you to think about what assets you've got and actually decide whether some of them are things that you shouldn't retain.
Assets are only there to be used by people, and by sort of critically looking at how things are used, you actually can assess what assets you really need and whether it's worthwhile repairing them or replacing them. In some cases now, assets that were well used 20, 30 years, 40 years ago, there's no use for them any longer, and so councils shouldn't really necessarily be planning to replace them just because they're there.
They know they've got these assets, and then when all the information starts coming in, they ask the question then, do we need them? Do we need these levels of service that we're looking at? Do we need to make some of these assets redundant?
Quite often communities get to the stage where their need for a particular service is not as great, and they then have to assess what is the future cost for that service, and maybe they would prefer to have something delivered in another fashion. So if you haven't got the forecasts of how much it's going to cost, you can't make those decisions.
It still comes back down to the community desires and what they want. It may not be a purely economical decision at the end of the day, but it's still, asset management processes make you go through that sort of thinking, which often hasn't been done in the past.
But it puts it very much in the context of saying, well, okay, if that's what I want, that's the impact. And so asset management is not taking that away, it's simply bringing home the reality of how our resources can be best used.
Everything's about making choices, and you make better choices when you've got an informed, empowered and supportive community.
Communities make continual demands on councils, but what you find is that people generally understand that there is a limit to what communities can afford to do.
And we're now in a position to start saying to them, well, yes, if you want these things, these swimming pools and these big event centres, if you want these things, that's fine, but here's the other side, here's our bread and butter. This is what we've got to do, and these are the things that you might want to do. Now, you start making some choices about what you're willing to live with in terms of cost.
In the end, we've got councils who are elected to, on behalf of people, make those kind of choices. Now, they've got to be informed. My job, and others like me, is to make sure the information's in front of the decision makers, they can get it right.
This process is never easy. You'll have inherited many of these assets, and you'll have to manage them whether you want to or not. Some will be brand spanking new, and others will be way past their use-by date. But for all these assets, it's imperative that you know their condition. Good information is the key to any successful asset management plan.
Simply to have a record of all of that piping is a major step forward, and we generally, or historically, have only jumped when the pipe is broken, and that's not a realistic source of asset protection.
A lot of people assume that we know already, and that this has been done before, 5 years ago or 10 years ago or whenever, and it's still going to be appropriate. A, we haven't necessarily done this in the past to anywhere near the degree that's necessary, and B, even if we have, it's out of date and has to be done again.
That's a big thing about local authority assets. Many of them are hidden, many of them have very long lives, and thus they tend to get overlooked. It's all about planning, it's about knowing your asset, knowing the condition it's in, making predictions about its life, prioritising the work that needs done. There is no way that you can fix them all at once, so you need a planned approach.
I think one of the issues that we're facing as asset managers is to getting a better handle on the condition and performance of our asset. While we may have in place asset management plans, they are based on information that is available at the current time. And I suspect that over the next few years there will be more effort being put into determining and fine-tuning the condition data that we've got and the performance of our assets, which again will be reflected in future financial programs.
The key to a good asset management plan is that it bridges the gap between the vision, the strategy, and the large volumes of operational data required to make that strategy work. Ensuring that you get a good plan requires a lot of housekeeping and a lot of leadership. And it's your job to provide that leadership.
It's not just a case of managing the asset in terms of the present. You're looking at managing the asset in terms of 20 or 30 years away. So if the various factors don't work in cooperation together like that, you're going to find real problems coming up in the long term. And that's where the key to asset management is.
It's for future generations, really. And some people have to have the courage and the leadership to realise the importance of doing this.
And that's been a facet of New Zealand public sector for years, as you look after future generations. And I hate that to go away. But I think in the past some of the assets haven't been maintained for future generations, and perhaps you could say the current generation is being somewhat penalised by that.
The quality of a local authority, indeed like the quality of the central government, is very much dependent on the vision, the enterprise, and the quality of the elected leadership of that local authority.
Often we have to react to something that happens today. And we, when planning these sorts of things, have to be far, far more visionary than that. Any expenditure that we're going to incur in an environment like this has to be considered in the next 20 to 50 years. And if we only react short term, we're actually short-changing everybody. So I believe my role as a politician, as a steward of this community, is to look out beyond the next just few years to what is really going to happen long term.
Gradually people are becoming to realise that in fact you invest for the long term, not short term, and that councillors are, in my view, becoming much more aware of that and therefore much more responsible for the intergenerational effect of anything they do.
It takes a lot of cooperation from a lot of people. It takes a lot of hard work, but in the end, it's your community that gets the benefit.
We're talking about good management here of infrastructure for whole communities. So it's a community business to be absolutely certain about where you are and where you want to go and how to get there most cost effectively. So you never let up. You've got to really have these plans. They've got to be real. The consultation's got to be proper. It can't be just superficial. Everyone's got to understand, cards on the table. I think that's the big change that's taken place.
It's a partnership between council and its community to really work out, what's wanted and therefore what's going to support that service level over a long period of time.
It's not about the assets, it's about what the asset gives to the people. It's the water flowing through the asset to the people. And if they're paying for it,
They got to know the value and the risk and the service and the quantity. So the plans have got to be written in such a way that they can understand it.
It means the decision makers, which are your councillors, have credible information, that they know when they're making decisions that they've got good solid information behind them to make those decisions. So they should feel a lot more relaxed. And that being the case, it's easier to sell it to communities as well. Communities know that there's hard data behind this. It's not just the current council's wishes, it's needs, and they can consult with the community.
Asset management plans are not set in concrete. I see them as dynamic documents. They're something that give you a direction as of now with the information you have. As that information becomes more robust, those plans will change. There will be other factors, like councils may decide that there's something else they want to deal with, so that needs to be incorporated into it. So the asset management plans in 10 years' time will be a lot more robust, they'll be a lot more accurate than they are now, and at the same time they will provide the information that councillors need to make decisions that are important to the community and providing the service.
We will see sophisticated asset management plans used by local authorities. They will be much better placed to manage their risk and their continuity planning if something goes wrong, and hopefully it will prevent things going wrong. There will be predictions for asset failures. There will be much greater precision in what level of investment is needed to maintain and replace assets.
It's what one does in running a household, that you put aside some money for painting the house or a new roof. So the assets that a council owns, and we own them on behalf of the community, means that we do have to do that forward planning. We've got to look at maintenance and renewal, and we've got to put that money aside.
And if they're putting that little bit aside each year for maintenance and perhaps for extension or whatever in the future, it means it takes the highs and lows out of the rates. Because otherwise, 5 years down the track, they may be looking at a horrendous rate rise.
Well, the producers of this video wanted me to at least be seen to ride on the roller coaster, but I've given up on that sort of thing. And I don't go searching for the great thrills of being up and down and all over the place anymore. I leave that to the thrill seekers. I'm more concerned with a sustainable future. If you can care for all of this now and provide for its protection and renewal, and hand it on to our children and our children's children, then you'll not only deserve to be re-elected, you probably will be re-elected. Thanks for watching, and all the best for being stewards of our future.